Potluck presents The Grand Duke from Boys Ranch. Part 2 with special guest star Bill Sarpalius. Last week, from homeless to the Texas Senate. In part 1, we find out how Bill Sarpalius went from having polio to eating out of dumpsters and not knowing how to read to becoming one of Texas' most successful senators, saving thousands of lives. Let's get ready for part 2. Once upon a time. Hi, and welcome to another edition of Potluck, your anything and everything talk and entertainment TV show. My name is Laura Hartman, and I am your host. Today is the second part of an interview with retired Senator and Governor Bill Sarpalius, who wrote a book about his life called The Grand Duke from Boys Ranch. If you missed last week's, make sure you go to www.potluck-online.org to find out more. The first part is really great. We don't cover everything in the book, but we cover enough to make it interesting. Today we're going to go over the second part, which is going to simply blow you away. So please stay tuned. And again, please welcome the Honorable Bill Sarpalius.
And in the book, the reader will read about different issues that were brought to me. One of them is an example where Texas, you could legally run an ambulance out of the back of a pickup truck.
Wow, that just blows my mind.
There were no standards for ambulances, or the ones that owned ambulances were counties and funeral homes.
Wow. And was it a matter of funding, or just they just put the trucks to use?
Nobody addressed it. And when I got elected, these doctors came to me and told me about how so many of their patients were patients that were picked up in an automobile accident and were, by the fact that the people were not trained, they paralyzed them.
Wow.
And so I drafted a bill. I learned a lot about it, and I carried that bill and passed it. It was one of my early bills setting up standards for ambulances in Texas, where you had to have a paramedic and an EMT, and the ambulances had to be licensed and inspected, and you had to have training. And there's no doubt that one piece of legislation saved a lot of lives and a lot of people from being severely damaged.
Right.
But it was an issue that I knew nothing about when I came in, but I'd learned a lot about it by being involved in. Well, I found myself involved in many other issues just like that, which I talk about in the book as well.
Right. And you also have famous people who came to talk to you also. Like Willie Nelson.
Yes, when I became chairman of the Ag Committee, Willie Nelson was a huge fan of farmers and ranchers, and we worked together on different loan programs to help beginning farmers, and he was a great guy. I got to know him for many years. We have stayed in touch, and he's been a real advocate for farmers and ranchers and agriculture.
Sure. That's great. So moving on back to your what you wanted to, the whole reason why you went into becoming a senator was to help make changes for alcohol and drug abuse, or to get help for people. So what were your steps to do that?
Well, I remember the first reception I had, a bunch of members came up to me and said, "What are you going to be working on? What issues are you going to be involved in?" So I told them I want to establish alcohol and drug treatment centers. And they would say, "Oh, that's a good issue to talk about, but it'd never be done because the alcohol lobby and the beer lobby are the strongest lobby groups in Austin, and they'll never go for that." Well, I didn't have a single senator that encouraged me, but I had to figure out a way to get this done. So I carried the DWI bill, which was just getting started in California through Mothers Against Drunk Drivers. And I helped set up the first chapter in Texas in Houston. And I saw that as maybe my vehicle to work towards treatment.
Mhm.
So I drafted probably the strongest DWI bill in the nation. It was the first bill that allowed for the use of video cameras. Video cameras were just coming of its age, and it allowed for mandatory penalties where you couldn't have repeat offenders. I remember one case where a guy had killed a family, the entire family, and he had been a first offender 23 times.
Oh my gosh.
And I found many cases like that. So bringing all that to light in the legislature through the DWI bill, and the DWI bill, it was a hard bill to pass. You would think it would be easy, but it wasn't.
And because it was because of the lobbyists mostly.
Yes, because of the lobby groups. And but what I did in mandatory penalties, I had set it up to where if you committed to DWI, this was your penalty on a first offense, and had a second offense. Well, a third offense, I had required treatment, knowing that there was no treatment. But I figured if I could keep that in the bill, then the next session they would have to pass a bill to allow treatment centers.
Sure.
And that's exactly what happened. The following session, I helped create a new state agency called the Texas Commission on Alcohol and Drug Abuse, and it set up alcohol and drug treatment centers all across Texas.
Wow. And this eventually went also all across the nation? I mean, the similar?
Yeah, it was. It was copied. That legislation was passed in a lot of other states as well. And it became the model bill for DWI.
Right. And based on, this was like around the 80s, correct?
Yes.
It boggles my mind that nobody had thought about doing that before.
Yeah, it was in the early 80s. And what was even more ironic was we passed the DWI bill, but it was still legal to drink and drive in Texas.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
You could still legally go up and buy a can of beer and drive it, or buy a 6-pack and just have at it.
Right, right.
So the following session, I passed a bill to prohibit that, where you couldn't drink and drive.
Oh my gosh. Wow. So were there other senators and governors from other states that, you know, that coordinated directly with you, or they just did their own thing?
No, there's several of them that worked with me.
Okay.
But in the book, it gives a real insight on how the legislative process works. Like in Texas, you had 31 senators, and when I first started, none of them supported it.
Wow.
But how you work together, and how I would try to, if a member was totally against it, I'd find a way to make him change his mind.
That's great.
So,
yeah. So did you have petitions going on back then, or were there a lot of families who had been affected by this that were, wanting to communicate with you?
It was both. And when the House took the bill up, they refused to accept the Senate version, which was the bill that I had written. They wanted to pass their own bill,
right,
which was very watered down. So what happens in the legislative process when you have two different bills on the same subject, you have a conference committee where you have half the members are from the House and half of them are from the Senate. And you meet in a conference and you work out the differences between the two bills. Well, I was chairman of that conference committee. So the first time we met, I asked the members if they would be willing to accept the Senate version, and the House members said no. The Senate members said yes. I said, wow. Then we'll stand adjourned until the House sees the wisdom of the Senate.
Oh, wow.
So it wasn't until the last day of the session, in the last few hours, were we able to finally pass that bill. But there was a lot of public pressure on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the book gives a real good insight on how you can accomplish good things through the legislative process.
Right. Even when you think that there's no end point, especially when you have when everybody's opposing what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you also were able to get it so that insurance starts paying for people's treatment, correct?
I did. That was another piece of legislation I carried, because even though they needed treatment, they didn't have the funds. So the state would help pay for part of that, but then I also allowed for the insurance companies to cover a person who wanted to, who paid for insurance coverage. So that opened up a lot of doors, and it became a market for insurance companies as well.
Okay. That's great. That's great. So once you got past, were you able to, after you were able to do that, then what else did you look forward to? Or what, your next path was to go even further, because apparently, as I mentioned earlier, when you put your mind to something, you achieve it, and you achieved more than that. I mean, you just went full on.
Well, then the congressional seat opened up, and I felt like I could probably do something there as well. But it was a tough race in the primary. In Texas, we have an early primary. It's in March, and I had announced in January, and not too long after I had announced, I was with my staff on my birthday. We had a birthday party, and this guy comes up to me. I never saw his face, and he hit me, knocked me down, and kicked me and busted my jaw here and here.
Oh my gosh.
And ran out the door. And so they had to wire my mouth shut. And as it turned out, he was hired by some drug dealers to put me out of the race.
Wow.
So, I couldn't understand why somebody would do that to me. But I had carried this bill in the Texas Senate that I was working on, that there was mandatory penalties for anybody who sold drugs to minors.
Sure.
And I was tapping into their business. So everybody was asking me, what are you going to do now? Because I couldn't talk. I could talk like this, with just through my teeth.
Right.
And so I told them I was running. I was not going to get out of the race.
Now, had you heard about, running for office? Had you heard about people being beat up like that before? Or was this this came as a huge surprise to you?
It was a surprise. Yeah, it was. But I went ahead and campaigned. I did just like I did when I ran for the Texas Senate, and it was a larger district. It was some more area that people didn't know me and I didn't know them, and I had to campaign, and I went ahead and did TV debates.
Wow.
Live, and I would hold the mic to my mouth and say, I'm the only guy running for Congress that'll keep his mouth shut. But fortunately, I won the primary.
Wow.
And then I had a tough general election, but I got elected in the general election, won that election. And then when I came to Washington, I was elected president of my freshman class. But I still didn't know what my mission would be. What should I work on? I was put on the ag committee because of my agricultural background.
Mm-hmm.
And then this tall man walks in my office from Lithuania. And my name's Lithuanian, but I knew nothing about my family. And he told me of my uncle, who was a famous composer of music. And he was a music teacher in Vilnius. And I asked him what he was doing in Washington, and he said he was head of a new political party called the Sąjūdis Party. And his goal was to get him on the ballot. He said if we could just get on the ballot against the Communist Party,
wow.
He thought the Sąjūdis Party could gain a majority. And I'll never forget, he told me, he said, if the Zionist Party could win, then Lithuania would break away from the Soviet Union. And if Lithuania broke away, then he thought Estonia and Latvia would follow, and then Georgia and Ukraine and Romania, and it would lead to the fall of the communist empire. Well, if you'd have been in my office in 1989 and heard that, you would have thought he was crazy.
Right.
Well, that was my calling. So I began to help him. And all this is in the book as well. I was very naive. I thought I could go to the Russian embassy and convince them to put this Zionist Party on the ballot. And I learned how to do resolutions and pass resolutions in the House and got more and more members to sign on to it and support it. And then eventually President Bush had chosen me and 3 other members of Congress, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans, to go to Lithuania representing the United States to observe those elections. And we got into Berlin. We got into Berlin about a couple weeks before the Berlin Wall collapsed. And that was something to see.
I'll bet.
And the Soviets took our passports and visas away and would not allow us to come in. So we held a press conference in the lobby of that hotel, and it hit every paper around the world about how the Soviets had denied these members of Congress to come in and observe the elections representing the United States. So finally, the next day, they let us in for 16 hours. And the Zionist Party had won. They gained a majority. And my friend, the music teacher, was elected their first president.
So do you think that from you being able to go in and observe that made a difference, or do you think that they were going to win anyway?
They were going to win anyway. Okay. They were determined people. We got on a school bus with the new leaders, and we went to this town just out of Vilnius. And we sat in the back of a school bus, and they didn't know how to set their new government up. They were asking us, how do you choose a speaker? So we had brought copies of our Constitution and that had been printed in Lithuanian and gave it to them. And we discussed in the back of that school bus how to set up their government. And when we got into this town, we got a Catholic cardinal who had been in prison or exile for over 40 years.
Wow.
And we came back to Vilnius, and I wish you could have seen what I saw. There were thousands of people surrounding this old Catholic cathedral that had been turned into a museum for the Soviet Union. And
which they did a lot of back then, right? I mean, that's what the communists do. They take historical places or churches and turn them into museums.
Exactly. And we came in there in that church, and they'd already built scaffolding up on the back, and they were scrubbing the ceilings, and you could see where there was painting in the ceilings. And they had mass for the first time in 52 years.
Wow.
And there was not a dry eye anywhere. I cannot think of anything in my lifetime that I've ever witnessed that was more emotional, more compelling than that moment in my time. It was something to see. And then, of course, the Soviets brought their tanks from Afghanistan to Lithuania, and they surrounded the Parliament building. And it was a standoff.
Oh, wow.
And so being in Congress, we would bring delegations over there and try to, and we did everything we could to try to convince President Bush to recognize Lithuania as a free and independent country. Mm-hmm. And of course, the other countries began to withdraw as well from the Soviet Union, and communism slowly crumbled.
Wow. So were they challenged to withdraw, or they just went ahead and withdrew, and then they were on their merit?
The Soviet tanks stayed in Lithuania for over a year.
Okay.
Surrounded that building. And they cut off all their utilities, all their communications with the outside world.
Oh, wow.
I mean, one time we snuck into the Parliament building. They had 1,000 people outside surrounding that Parliament building, 1,000 people 24 hours a day. And they'd built these bonfires, and they had built a small wall between the Parliament building and where the tanks were.
Mm-hmm.
But they were determined people. There's several stories in the book of things that they did, and the courage of those people I remember a 16-year-old boy took me up to the top of the Parliament building. It had a flat roof, and showed me where they had taken these 2x4s and ran nails through them and covered the roof with these 2x4s with nails. And he told me, he said, "See, Congressman, no helicopter can land on this building."
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And so he took me to the edge, and you could see where all the bonfires were around it. I felt like I was in the Alamo. And you see all the tanks. And I told that young 16-year-old boy, I said, "You don't understand who you're up against." I said, "This is the Soviet Union. They can blow this building up with a blink of the eye."
Yeah.
And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, "Oh, no, Mr. Congressman, you don't understand." He said, "Today we are free people, and we will live as free people, or we will die as free people."
Wow. That's amazing.
I knew right then communism was going to crumble. The Soviet Union was going to collapse.
Right, right. And all the other Baltic countries became free from there.
Yes, and I went and worked with those states as well. Was involved in a riot in Estonia, where the Soviets came in the back of the park. It was in a huge park where we had this gathering. And I'll never forget when they snuck us out. We were on the stage, and they snuck us out in these white vans. And I saw this Soviet soldier level his rifle and shoot a cameraman who was filming the event. But they fought for their freedom. They got it. But to be in Congress at that moment and at that time, and to be involved in those issues we couldn't get any better than that. And that's
one experience.
What I write about in the book is
yeah,
what all I witnessed and what I saw. And then, of course, the country of Lithuania eventually gave me their highest honor. They made me their Grand Duke. And that's where the book gets its name, the Grand Duke from Boys Ranch.
Right, right. Which is amazing. That's amazing. So do you stay in touch with the president of Lithuania still, or still in contact?
Yeah, Dr. Landsbergis, we still stay in touch. And of course, he's up in the years, we all are, but we still reminisce about those days.
Yeah, I bet. And did you get in touch with family members, like, cousins or distant cousins?
I did. I was able to meet some people who had the same last name as mine. Now, they spoke Lithuanian, and of course, I don't know their language.
Right.
But we tried our best through interpreters to communicate, and I learned a little bit about where my roots were there. But a lot of people left Lithuania and the Baltic states around the turn of the century, when they began to fall under communist rule. And there was a large Jewish community in Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia that were eliminated. There were mass graves all over those states where they executed Jewish communities.
Oh, wow.
So at that time, there was a big movement of people trying to get out, and some of them made it to the United States, and that's where my ancestors came from.
Oh, wow. Well, that's interesting. I mean, it's sad that happened over there with the communities over there. But wow. Well, we're running out of time. But so what's next? Are you going to write another book after this?
I don't know. I started getting a lot of speaking engagements because it's a motivational story.
Sure, it's very inspirational.
Yeah, and I was doing very well with it, and then of course COVID hit.
Yeah.
So, conferences and those type of things that pretty well went off to the side. But maybe once we get all this behind us, I'll be able to pick that up again. And I really enjoy doing public speaking and talking about what this country has to offer and the freedoms and opportunities that so many of us take for granted.
Yeah, exactly. Especially what's going on right now. So, so you do Zoom public speaking, correct?
Yes, I do some of the Zoom conferences, and I enjoy those very well because some of them you're able to communicate back and forth, and people can ask questions, and
Sure.
And it allows you to add more to the story.
Okay. Now, where can people find out information to have you as a public speaker, and also to find your amazing book?
Well, my book is on Amazon. You can either look up by my name or the title, The Grand Duke from Boys Ranch. And
we'll put the link down on the screen.
And then the best way to reach me is through my website. It's just my name, bill@sarpalius.com. And I've got all my contact information there. And I'm always interested in trying to help people and help motivate people in whatever profession they're in, whatever occupation.
Sure. Now you had a vision and you just went through it. You went for it. And I think with a lot of people who have gone through the same scenario that you have gone through, a lot of people probably give up, or they may give up hope. And your book is actually, like I said, it's a testimony to where if you put your mind to it, you can achieve it. And hopefully this can give a lot of inspiration to people to achieve their dreams.
Yeah. Well, when I speak a lot, I use the phrase that in this country, you can dream any dream and you can make that dream come true.
Yeah. Thank God.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank
you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed the show. I hope you were able to catch both parts of our interview. And if you missed the first part, make sure you go to www.potluck-online.org. And again, you can find Bill's book, which is called The Grand Duke from Boys Ranch, at Amazon.com. Thank you again for joining us. We look forward to seeing you next time.